So we are only 21 days into 2022 and already the pandemic narrative is being wound down for some reason. Why? Why is this happening right at the beginning of 2022 and right in the middle of the Northern Hemisphere winter, which is obviously cold and flu season? Wouldn't that have been a perfect time for another scary case-demic, another variant? Doesn't the timing of this sudden shift in the agenda seem a little too suspicious to you? Boris Johnson in the UK recently announced the following.
So, this morning, the Cabinet concluded that because of the extraordinary booster campaign, together with the way the public have responded to the Plan B measures, we can return to Plan A in England and allow Plan B regulations to expire. As a result, from the start of Thursday next week, mandatory certification will end. Organisations can, of course, choose to use the NHS COVID pass voluntarily, but we will end the compulsory use of COVID status certification in England. From now on, the government is no longer asking people to work from home. And people should now speak to their employers about arrangements for returning to the office. And having looked at the data carefully, the Cabinet concluded that once regulations lapse, the government will no longer mandate the wearing of face masks anywhere. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, from tomorrow we will no longer require face masks in classrooms, and the Department for Education will shortly remove national guidance on their use in communal areas. In the country at large, we will continue to suggest the use of face coverings in enclosed or crowded spaces, particularly when you come into contact with people you don't normally meet, but we will trust the judgment of the British people and no longer criminalise anyone who chooses not to wear one. The government will also ease restrictions further on visits to care homes, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, will set out plans in the coming days.
This article is from theindependent.co.uk. Czech Republic scraps vaccine mandate as daily cases hit record high. Czech PM Peter Fiala said he did not want to deepen the divides with mandatory COVID jabs. This article is from rte.ie. NPHET gives green light to easing most restrictions. The National Public Health Emergency Team has given the green light to ending most COVID-19 public health restrictions. It is understood that only mask wearing, COVID passes for international travel and isolation when symptomatic are to remain in place. A letter from the Chief Medical Officer regarding NPHET's recommendations was sent to government this evening. It does not contain any timeline for the lifting of COVID-19 restrictions. This leaves it to Cabinet to decide the speed at which it will happen. The Times of Israel had this article. Finance Minister calls for cancellation of COVID vaccine Green Pass. Though, for whatever reason, Austria remains in a tyrannical parallel universe by comparison. Market Watch had this article. Austria becomes first country in Europe to mandate COVID-19 vaccination for all adults. A maximum potential fine for people who don't comply after a series of reminders, €3,600. Things are also pretty rough in Canada. Euronews had the following. No vaccine, no booze. Quebec introduces new restrictions for unvaccinated. The Canadian province of Quebec, which is the most affected by a surge of COVID-19 cases linked to the Omicron variant, has introduced new restrictions against unvaccinated people. From now on, liquor and cannabis stores are only accessible to people who are vaccinated against COVID-19. Health officials say they hope the order will encourage more people to get vaccinated. Well, good to know they have nothing to do with healthcare then and everything to do with coercion. But Montreal residents seem to be divided over the decision. As I've outlined in several previous videos, things remain as bad as ever in the likes of Australia, for whatever reason. The point is, there's a shift happening, at least in some parts of the world. But the question is, why? And why now? This seems way too good to be true. Well, perhaps the great pivot of 2022 is soon approaching, as the hysterical pandemic narrative slowly makes way for the hysterical climate change narrative. The World Economic Forum posted this on their Twitter on January 20th. So there's no doubt that 2022 is another big milestone year, and COVID, though still a presence, and probably will still be a presence, will have to take a bit of a back seat while the next Hegelian crisis is manufactured. The reason much of the world appears to be divided when it comes to the COVID narrative, some countries increasing restrictions while others are loosening them, is possibly due to the sheer complexity involved in attempting to coordinate so many different governments and stakeholders at the same time. For example, vaccine uptake is fairly high in Ireland and in the UK, where restrictions are being reduced, while a place like Austria has a generally lower uptake, so the government is having to try to ramp up the intimidation and coercion and fear levels in order to achieve a certain degree of compliance. The reality is, even if everything went back to normal tomorrow, why should we trust our governments and their pure mainstream media machines that have lied to us for 2 years and coerced a huge amount of their populations to take a toxic substance into their bodies? Moreover, anyone celebrating this return to freedom is very foolish. Only a slave feels gratitude to their master when they are given additional freedoms and privileges again. The government has no right to give our freedoms back to us because they had no right to take them in the first place. In addition, all of the COVID emergency health regulations and laws still remain on the books to be used again whenever they wish. They haven't gone away, and not one person responsible for the untold damage that this crime against humanity has caused has been brought to book. In short, this is not a victory of any kind, because the central villains behind the COVID scam and their puppet government lackeys have not been arrested and prosecuted. The situation I fear we are entering into is merely a period of reprieve. They are stopping to basically reload and possibly feel more likely to succeed with the next phase of their agenda now that they have placed much of the population into a compliant and obedient state, but also because a huge amount of people have now been made completely dependent upon the state for an income, which will likely morph into universal basic credit before too long. We know that all of this is leading to the big milestone year of 2030, and I think we should have been highly suspicious that the alleged pandemic kicked off right at the start of the new decade. The nice round number, 2020, the 10-year starting pistol to 2030 began, and the last 2 years have been about forcing radical social, political and economic changes on the world. Some of these things have already been achieved. There's a lot of things they intend to throw at us, as you know. Negative interest rates, hyperinflation is on the way, the digital ID stuff, social credit and carbon scores, food and supply chain breakdowns, mass economic collapse, you name it. They have a lot of levers they can pull. But there's a percentage of the population, people like us, who are now awake and not going back to sleep. We're wise to their game. We look at the mainstream media with enormous skepticism and contempt, and we see what our governments announce, and we see the Hegelian dialectic a million miles away. We can read between the lines, decode the propaganda, and recognize when we're being told to sacrifice our freedom for more security. Moreover, we can tell something is a scam by asking the obvious questions that normies don't ask. Who benefits from this new paradigm? How does it affect my life? If the result of each new crisis is that our lives are less free and we are financially worse off, then we can safely assume it's a scam. But at the same time, I do smell the scent of desperation in all of this. This sudden pivot away from COVID right now, at the beginning of the year, it smacks of an urgency to achieve certain things on a timetable that might be slipping away from them. Regardless, I expect the case to be made for climate lockdowns before too long. Anyway, I wanted to move on to this clip next. It was posted on the World Economic Forum website on November 12th, 2021, and it's from their Great Narrative Conference. Nari Woods said the following.
The obstacle is ensuring that people want to come along. And that's why we've got to make government work. And I don't say that just because I'm Dean of a School of Government. I say that because across the world, people don't need to love their government, but they need a government to ensure that other citizens will act in a decent way so that they too can act in a decent way. They need government to be competent and fair and non-self-enriching so that they too can be those things in their communities. And if government doesn't do that, it becomes impossible for them to trust. And without trust, you get fear and anxiety. And with fear and anxiety, people vote for people to break government, not to use it to do great things. And that's what we're seeing around the world. So to me, the biggest obstacle is we can sit, at Davos a few years ago, the Edelman survey showed us that the good news is the elite across the world trust each other more and more. So we can come together and design and do beautiful things together. The bad news is that in every single country they were polling, the majority of people trusted that elite less. So we can lead, but if people aren't following, we're not going to get to where we want to go.
So there you go. That gives you some insight into the mindset that you're dealing with here. An elite. She literally used the word. Apparently they can meet up and do beautiful things together, i.e. make all kinds of plans about how the world will work, which affects the lives of the average person, you and me, the little people. But unfortunately for this elite group of power-hungry megalomaniacs, the proles just don't trust them. You see, there is this small group of people in this world who think of themselves as elite, and they think they are above us and beyond us. They think they're superior to the average person. They think they have some unspoken, preordained right to rule. And we're supposed to simply live in this kind of neo-feudal system, simply obeying them without question, and agree to live by their decrees. A rich, jet-setting, aristocratic ruling class of technocrats and oligarchs, no different to the monarchies of old, but only now dressed up with suits and ties, spewing their horse shit from the pulpit of fancy conferences where deals are done with politicians and governments to bypass the democratic will of the people and control our countries by stealth. The globalists aren't going to simply allow governments to hand back freedoms to the people unless it's part of some larger strategy that benefits them. Anyway, with regard to the sudden pivot in the narrative, I'll give you another possibility, just to throw this out there. Who knows? It's possible that a new, even more deadly scariant is on the way, and that the reopenings happening in certain places are part of a plan to introduce a giant "I told you so" moment later on. In other words, in the UK and Ireland, they could say that they tried to give us our freedoms back, they tried to open up and go back to normal, and look what happened. Everyone mingled, and suddenly there was a new mutation, a new variant emerged, and now the cases and hospitalizations are up again, thus proving we need to lock down even harder and mandate vaccines like they've done in other places. That's also a possibility. After all, not so long ago, the likes of Albert Bourla of Pfizer were saying things like COVID vaccine boosters will likely be needed every year. And in July of 2020, Klaus Schwab said the following.
It's even aggravated by the question about the vaccine itself. We don't know yet, for example, is one dose sufficient? Do you need 2 doses? In what interval? Do you have even to be vaccinated every year? Because the antibodies may not sustain for a long time.
So now that we are increasingly being told that restrictions, vaccine passports, vaccine mandates need to end, do we honestly believe that they've just given up on the plan to have humanity jabbed every year? Like they've just suddenly gotten over that now? They don't want to do it anymore? I think they are trying the 1 step back, 2 steps forward approach. And they'll just try again later. They're just backing off for now. Maybe when the economy has collapsed and people are hungry and therefore desperate for any solution offered, maybe they'll go towards the needle then. That could be the thinking. If they can completely transform the financial system by hyperinflating away our currencies and introducing a new digital currency, then they can place any kind of digital barrier in the way They want to introduce the digital ID that grants you access to everything from your social media, healthcare, bank account, your travel passport. It includes a record of your individual carbon footprint, purchasing habits, your digital wallet. If access to the digital currency requires the digital ID, and the ID also requires a record of your vaccine status, then that could easily coerce more people into taking the jab, because they won't be able to get access to their money if they don't. My point is, they need to first bring more and more people to their knees and make life more difficult for them. And they've certainly wanted to trash the economic system to make way for an entirely new and more tightly controlled one. This next article is from The Defender, Children's Health Defence News and Views, dated the 7th of January 2022. International finance leaders hold war game exercise simulating global financial collapse. Should we be worried? High-level international banking officials and organisations gathered last month for a global war game exercise simulating the collapse of the global financial system. The tabletop exercise was reminiscent of Event 201, the pandemic simulation exercise that took place just before COVID-19 entered the global scene. The Collective Strength initiative was held for 10 days beginning December 9th, 2021 at the Israeli Finance Ministry in Jerusalem. It was relocated to Jerusalem from Dubai World Expo over concerns about the Omicron variant. Israel led a 10-day country contingent that also included Treasury officials from the US, Austria, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Thailand, and the United Arab Emirates. Representatives from supranatural organizations such as the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and Bank of International Settlements also participated. Described as a simulated war game, the exercise sought to model the response to various hypothetical large-scale cyber attacks on the global financial system, including the leaking of sensitive financial data on the dark web, hacks targeting the global foreign exchange system, and subsequent bank runs and market chaos fueled by fake news. However, the main theme of Collective Strength appears not so much the simulation of such cyber attacks, but, as the name of the initiative implies, the strengthening of global cooperation in cybersecurity and the financial sector. As reported by Reuters, participants in the simulation discussed multilateral responses to a hypothetical global financial crisis. Proposed policy solutions included debt repayment grace periods, swap repo agreements, coordinated bank holidays, and coordinated delinking from major currencies. The idea of simulated delinking from major currencies raised some eyebrows because of its timing. On the same day participants gathered to launch Collective Strength, reports circulated that the Biden administration was considering removing Russia from the global electronic payment messaging system known as SWIFT, short for Society for Worldwide International Financial Telecommunication. This measure would be part of a package of economic sanctions the US would levy against Russia should it attack Ukraine. However, what may raise even more eyebrows is the list of participants in the Collective Strength simulation, which includes the IMF and World Bank, and indirectly the World Economic Forum. It was the World Economic Forum, along with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which ran the simulated Event 201 in October 2019. As previously reported by The Defender, the World Economic Forum also supported the development of financial instruments such as credit and debit cards that would track personal carbon allowances on an individualized basis. An executive summary issued in November 2020 by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in collaboration with the World Economic Forum provided a rundown of just the type of scenario that was simulated as part of Collective Strength. The report's authors, Tim Maurer and Arthur Nelson, described a world whose financial system is undergoing an unprecedented digital transformation accelerated by the coronavirus pandemic. And it sure was fortuitous that the pandemic just happened to come along then, isn't it? Because, as we know, that's what happens when there's a pandemic. The global financial system just radically gets changed, right? Anyway, I'll leave the full article linked below. It's a very good article worth reading. Let me know what you guys think is going on right now. I hope I've helped to give some shape to all of this. And by the way, I'm still working on my donation system in addition to the Subscribe Star. Thank you very much to everybody who's supporting me there. I've included a few crypto options for those who are interested, all linked below. God bless, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.